the other side of toxic Christianity, I found myself faced with one question. Now what? This podcast is about that question. We have conversations with folks who are asking themselves the same things. We're picking up the pieces of a fractured and fragmented faith. We're finding treasure in what the church called trash, beauty and solidarity in people and places we were told to fear, reject, and dismiss. I'm Tamice Helms, and this is Life After Leaven. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Life After Leaven podcast. I'm your host, Tamice Helms, and I am joined by my sister-in-law, Alyssa Sieb. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Alyssa, and then we're going to jump into our topic today. I'm super excited to have her here. So Alyssa has been the owner and operator of a small media company for 16 years. Previously, Alyssa worked as the international media director for a nonprofit committed to empowering the voices of local organizers and community leaders. Alyssa has traveled to over 40 countries and believes deeply in the diversity of leadership and thought across cultures. Her work has taken her from the largest Syrian refugee camp to the inner workings of one of Uganda's most powerful local women's rights initiatives and beyond. As her worldview broadens, her deepest desire is to see change brought to her own country of origin, an American currently living as an expat in Germany. So, Alyssa, welcome to the show. Happy to have you, sis.
So glad to be here with you. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So we know that this show is about what it looks like for us to leave toxicity behind. And I've talked about it a number of times that a lot of that process for me was found in the conversations I was having with people about their own processes. Then that was bringing me insight and perspective that I didn't have at first. So that's going to be my first question for you is kind of, what does life after Leaven look like for you?
Life after Leaven looks like freedom. It looks like going from being inside this fenced-in area that I was allowed to stay in. And I literally have a picture of like a sort of Sound of Music twirling on the hills life going on now. And I'm walking more and more, I think, into that freedom. You know, it feels like you were stuck in some thorn bushes and now you're still picking thorns out here and there that you don't even realize are still there. So it's a process, but it's a beautiful one.
It's a beautiful one. And so was there like a particular instance or something that kind of broke the camel's back for you? Or was it a gradual process in recognizing that there was sort of toxicity there? What was the aha moment for you?
For me, it was gradual for sure. Okay. I don't even know that you and I have talked about this, but I was actually thinking like, what was the start? And funnily enough, this John Piper thing was the start for me. So, John Piper, I was watching him, Tim Keller, and Dr. Anthony Brown. This was well over a decade ago. And they were talking about racism in the church. And when they got to Dr. Anthony Brown, he was breaking down what now feels very basic, like systemic racism. But as a white girl deep inside of that system, it was this, I was sitting with my husband and it was this like jaw-dropping moment, like scales are falling off of my eyes. And I naively thought, man, if other white Christians could just hear this, well, I'll be good and we'll start picking the system apart. And then shortly thereafter, Trayvon Martin happened. I blogged about it. I felt very strongly the injustice of the entire thing. And I was stunned to find out people I was in community with wanted to talk to me about it and literally felt the exact opposite. It was sort of my wake up like, oh, wow, this is not going to be the same for my entire community as I'm feeling right now. And then slowly it really came apart from there, starting to see all the ways that white Jesus was telling me what I couldn't do as a woman, what systems were okay and not okay, and so on and so forth.
Wow. So you had an experience of white Jesus. And I think that that's why I wanted to talk to you about it and why I'm really excited to have such diversity on the show, because I think, you know, one of the lies about whiteness is that it serves white people, and it doesn't. It's actually very harmful. So I appreciate you saying that and really want to talk to you about that, because I think one of the elements that we've talked about in some of the interviews that I've done, and then just you and I personally, that we get separated from whiteness is definitely from our bodies, our intuition,
Mm-hmm.
but also from the land. And one of the things I wanted to do, since the book kind of ends with this land acknowledgement, is to talk about land and ancestry and those types of things that really were probably the last things to kind of jostle me out of this, to begin to really
Mm-hmm.
ask questions and feel, confident in rejecting white Jesus. But I hadn't ever thought about what it would have been like before I married Ellison, and before you and I started having these conversations about what is it like for a white person to come to land differently and to think about ancestry differently. And so I'm so excited to like kind of rehab that conversation with you, so folks can kind of hear what that was like for you. So this part of our interview is just going to be about coming back to land and ancestry for you as a white woman who has gone to Germany and is living in Germany now. Tell us a little bit about that. What has that journey been like for you?
Yeah, so it actually was kind of a later piece for me as well. So we stepped out of white Jesus spaces a few years after kind of our eyes had started to be open, and we just thought we can't be part and party to this anymore. And I remember telling my mentor, who at the time, my mentor at the time was an older Black woman, and I remember telling her that I felt like I had no space
Mm-hmm.
because I was in a predominantly Black church then, which
Mm-hmm.
was a very healing experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want to pretend that I was suddenly now a Black woman. I wanted to come in, I wanted to learn and listen, but I didn't think anyone would be served by me now trying to, go and steal someone else's culture, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
piece of whiteness. And so I just felt very without a home. So I have friends. I have Black friends, I have white friends, all this, but I found myself not being able to identify with so much of American white culture anymore and feeling very
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable
Wow.
with it as the skills were falling off. But then, while I had amazing community with some of these Black women in my lives, I also knew like what they were enjoying and celebrating as part of their culture. It wasn't my culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Black culture has come together in the US as this beautiful sort of going against what spaces Black people have been put into, and
Mm-hmm.
it was this sort of freedom culture, right? Freedom in the
Yes.
middle of oppression. But
Yes.
for the culture I was raised in, it was a culture of oppression, right? So
Mm.
I couldn't find a space and a home there anymore. And
Wow.
I remember telling her, I just don't know where I land. Like I love these relationships. I love where I am, but I'm just not sure who I am anymore.
Mm.
And that oddly got answered in a completely God way.
Mm.
So my husband was offered a contracting job in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and we decided to take it. My job's very international, so that was easy to do. And when we got here, it literally took, I think it was by the second week, we were sitting and having coffee out on a balcony, and I was like, "What is going on? Do you feel this
Mm.
connection to this land?" And my
Mm.
husband was saying, "Yeah, I do." And we knew
Mm.
he was part German, and I knew I was a little bit. I found out 2 weeks after that, not
Mm.
only am I about half German, but I found this out from the whole 23andMe, but my great grandparents had actually come from where I'm now living. I did not know this when I moved here.
Yeah.
And I started feeling this connection to this land and this space.
Mm-hmm.
And I started learning more about my European ancestry,
Right.
what that looked like, the good and the bad, right?
Right.
Because unfortunately, there's so much colonization attached to this, but
Mm-hmm.
trying to go deeper into the culture. And I've come to learn more about myself,
Mm-hmm.
come home to myself in a lot of ways, even discover little things about my family or my mom, who I now know is very German, that we didn't know that she just does things that are very German, and we didn't know that's what it was.
Yeah.
But as I've been able to come home more to some of the European culture and ancestry I have, I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling more of a connection to myself, which is beautiful. And I know not everyone can just up and move
Right.
to whatever country they were from, but I have started to explore what does it look like
Mm-hmm.
to pull off whiteness and actually look at what our heritage is, because we had to be asked to
Mhm.
give up our heritage to subscribe to whiteness.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like it functions, and it functions in America like a technology, right? It's
Mm,
not an actual identity. It's a tool. Whiteness is used as a tool. And that like part, I think, and what I hope is coming out and some of the things I've been saying is that, whiteness is equal opportunity employer.
yeah.
Anyone can live into whiteness, anyone can prescribe to whiteness, anyone can kind of repurpose it. Anyone can use it as something that they would use to walk in and live through the world with. And I think that some of the most damaging experiences I have had have been people of color who have subscribed to whiteness in a
Mm,
lot of ways. And so hearing you talk, and I think one of the first times we had the conversation, I was hearing you talk about what you were experiencing in the land and in the land of your people, and having come out there and visited you and seeing the way that you steward the land and the way that you talk about it. It was a beautiful thing to watch someone who have European descent have absolute like pride in their actual heritage, and to see
mm,
that as a beautiful thing, and to really what mattered to me was to really put it out there for people that there is something that you can dig into as you take off whiteness. What does it look like for white people to not buy into whiteness? And that's a different kind of fight. um
mm.
and it's a different journey, and that's why I want to feature those voices and those stories. I'm guessing, like, my question is, when you think about your German heritage, like, what elements of that do you feel like are unique and really special to you and beautiful to you?
Yeah. So, wow, the connection to land is such a big one. I have never been that into gardening. I haven't been that into being outdoorsy. Um, Even little things like just caring for the earth and really thinking about recycling other things. I mean, I know that's such a small piece, but just
Mhm.
Germany as a whole actually has done a great job stewarding their land. I mean, you've
Yes.
been out here, you've seen
Yeah.
it. And I have this desire to participate in it because I feel this
Mhm.
connection to it. And I know that back in the United States, I didn't feel that. And now I realize
Mm.
it was because me and my family, we'd stolen that land. I
Mhm.
do think there's
Wow.
paths back to learning how to love and care for a land that
Mhm.
you are now placed on,
Mhm.
because of generations past.
Mhm.
I think that our Indigenous American friends are like the ones that have to lead us to that. But
Absolutely.
for me, here in Germany, I just it's like a breath of air going outside and exploring and seeing things. And it's not just because, I mean, I've lived here for 4 years now. It's not that everything is just new to me.
Mhm.
But even going into the Alps, which is actually another area my family is from, um, I know this sounds crazy, but I can say it to you. Like, I do. I feel my ancestors. I feel
Yes.
them. This sense of like, this is where we had belonged. This is where
Mhm.
we, had stewarded the land and loved on the land for centuries. Um, and yeah, actually, can I ask you a question about that as a Black woman?
Sure, for sure.
I'd be so curious your thoughts
Mm.
as someone else who had no choice where they
Mhm.
were born.
Mhm.
What is that flipped on its head? I know you weren't
Yeah.
subscribing. You have Black culture, right? Which
Yes.
is a beautiful, beautiful thing as
Yeah.
A Black American woman. But
Yeah.
what do you think it looks like for a Black woman to kind of look into their heritage and their ancestors?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. It's something that I'm hoping to spend some time talking about on here too. I think it was the first time I ever did that was really having a conversation with Randy Woodley. I was on his farm. I was still pregnant back then too, so it was a while ago. I spent some time on their farm, and I remember telling him that I just didn't believe half the stuff I believed. I was lost. And what Randy and I did was go outside and like put our hands in the dirt, and he asked me to help him, like kind of around the garden. And I'm doing this, and I'm having these very, like you're saying, like I'm having these experiences with putting my hands in the soil, and I had never had that experience before. And so he's talking to me about how not only can our bodies speak, but the earth can speak and heal. And so, we're working in the garden. I'm eating food from his garden. I'm hanging out with him and his family, and we're having these conversations. And it was the first time I realized, like, oh, there's a difference in terms of Western ways of doing religion, and indigenous ways of doing religion. And that was kind of, the new track I got on. And as I was on that track, it started to give me like confidence in some of the things I was beginning to lay down about whiteness. One of the things, most of the important things, was the way that things grew. It was really interesting. I'll just tell this story real quick, but like, we're on Randy's farm and everything is just kind of growing and it looks like chaos, but they don't touch it. They don't manicure it. They don't add chemicals to it. And
Wow.
across from Randy's farm was this other farm, and the trees all grew the same way and the lines were very straight and it looked very pristine and beautiful. And so I'm looking across at that, and the spirit starts to talk to me about this juxtaposition, because I know that the farm across the street is putting chemicals in their food, right? And the reason this looks so beautiful is because it's poisonous. And they needed to add this poison to make it look great. Whereas Randy's farm, the elements that they planted take care of themselves. So there's certain trees that grow a certain type of leaf that deals with this type of parasite, but also helps this thing grow. And I was just looking at this ecosystem of the way that the earth is living and the way that the earth is this like living being. And it really marked me. And I come back home and I have that sense. Fast forward, I meet Ellison, and Ellison wants to go on hikes. Ellison is my spouse, for those who don't know, and Alyssa's sibling. And we're going to do these hikes. And I'm like, I don't do nature. I'm just learning about nature. And I'm trying to talk about this Randy Woodley thing. And then I meet my friend Sarah, who is from the land that I'm living on. This is the land of her people. And so something shifted for me in that, where it was like, oh, okay, this is my friend's land, that was stolen. And what's interesting about the phrase, because it's the land of the Mattapanai and Seneca, but it meant densely populated. And now Sarah's one of, like, I think less than 50 people in her tribe, from this area, which is really profound. So that really struck me, deeply. And then we were at a conference, and she started to talk to me about how she was feeling like telling me that the trees can hear and see, and that the trees remembered, and that the land remembers my ancestors. And it just clicked for me that this is all connected. And I started thinking, not only were they lynched from these trees, but these trees were bended to point towards prayer meetings. They were bended to kind of like, and shaped to move people towards freedom. And so the land has been, so gracious to my ancestors and longs to be gracious to me. And so, now Harlem, when she goes outside and forages or whatever, because we try to cook things from what grows outside of our home that's edible. And now she says, we're going to eat from Auntie Sarah's land. And so it's just this new way of thinking about ancestry, and how, indigenous folks really led me on this journey to really kind of integrate all of it. So I'm in my body. I have this great experience with theology and understanding things intellectually. I'm in my body, but now, like, being connected to the land has really kind of brought things full circle for me. And that's why I'm like really wanting to start the series off with this topic in particular, as we think about things happening in Syria and all over the world, with Ohio and the water, and things that were happening in Flint, and the things that we don't really pay attention to, that whiteness kind of tricks us into not paying attention to, that are so important for our growth, and for our maturation as believers. So I think that was my passageway. And what was beautiful about that is finding out that there are people all over, of all different ethnic backgrounds, who are having a similar sort of experience. So that's what it was like, I think, for me. That wasn't really a nutshell, but that's what it was like for me to come back to land and ancestry. But I have Black friends who have different stories about that,
Yeah.
who I'm hoping to get some of those folks on, so that we can hear diverse perspectives about this. But I do think it is important for us, if we're going to unleaven, that it needs to be a sort of walking out of faith or faithfulness or godliness, or whatever you want to call it, that includes a connection to the earth and to the land, and as well as our bodies. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
I was thinking as you were talking about that, if my grandmother handed me a piece of jewelry, before she had died, or I think of actually, my grandmother did give me some books before she died. Those
Mm,
are precious possessions to me because they've been
mhm.
handed down from my ancestors.
Yes.
But if I've stolen something from someone, in the
Mm,
end, I don't take very good care of it because it was never
mhm.
really mine to begin with, and I don't
Mm,
have the same feeling about it. And I think there's such an important piece to starting. If you're a light skinned person like me, with how did
mm,
I even get here? Well, the heritage is that it was stolen, right?
mm,
Stolen piece. So there's an acknowledgement of that has to happen, because I live on a land that, just 80 years ago, a horrible atrocity took place, right?
mhm,
Millions and millions of Jewish people were killed on the
mhm,
land that I'm living at right now. But what is interesting to me, um, is having come from the United States, the difference between how the history is handled. So
mhm.
I've even shown you when you came over, like if there
Yes.
is any space
Mhm,
where there was an SS headquarters or something else, you'll find plaques in just
mhm,
about every city
mhm,
naming what was done. And even in the one small city that I love here, that has one of these, they even name the person in their victims that committed suicide because of that.
mhm, mhm,
And they will clearly name this.
mhm,
Um, there's multiple laws around how the past is handled. Like if your great grandfather was a Nazi, you are not allowed to display anything Nazi on it on the street level,
mm,
because their thought is a Jewish person could be walking by and
mm.
could see that and you could trigger them. So there's all these steps that they put into place and all these acknowledgments, and the old concentration camps are now these memorials, these sort of
Mhm,
hallowed grounds where they're
mhm,
naming clearly all the things they've done. And
mhm,
as a woman from the United States, this shocked me, right?
mhm,
Because what do we do? We might have one little thing here and one little thing there, but we're
mhm,
having parties on plantations where people
mhm.
die,
Oh
right?
my gosh,
Weddings are happening.
weddings.
And we are not acknowledging what's happened
Mhm,
on our land. So, how can you
mhm,
heal from spaces where you won't even acknowledge it?
mm,
Um, I I think it's a whole process and a whole journey, and that is a piece of it for sure.
mhm, mhm,
Is just acknowledging it so that you can move on, and so you can go back to being in touch with the land instead of the atrocities that happened on it
mhm.
being such a huge constant factor, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that
That's
way you're
so
talking.
good.
And
That's
when you
so
were
good.
saying
Yeah, go
with
ahead.
food too, that's a big piece here, is their connection to the food. I can
Mm,
just go grab a carton of eggs at a big grocery store, and if I open it up, it's going to tell me where it came from, where the chickens lived. It might have some feathers on it. It's not all pretty.
mhm,
And there's this idea that we have much more seasonal food, much more access to the farmers around us. I,
mhm,
I got chills when you talked about the poisonous,
mhm,
um, how things that look beautiful and perfect can be poisonous. But that
mhm,
really is another piece that you touched on there that I think is so crucial.
mhm.
Is, do we even know where our food is coming from? There's the whole connection to land as well.
Yeah.
I just want to comment on that because you brought that up, and that was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning about that right now, and I mean, I was telling Ellison last night because you know that we're going vegetarian,
Mm,
and it was a process for me that has come as I've unleavened and taken seriously a lot of these aspects. And I watched this movie about where our food was coming from, and it was just a moment. And what's so funny about that is that we started to watch this documentary a year ago, and I felt the Holy Spirit say, you may want to pause this because this is going to have some effects in your
mm,
life. And I knew in the moment, I was like, babe, we have to turn this off because I just feel like I'm not ready to do whatever I'm about to get asked to do from this film. And so a year later, we finished it, and we finished it after we made this decision to kind of cut out meat and think about where our food was coming from and was it locally sourced and those types of things. And it's just been interesting how spiritual of a practice that has been. But on the other side, before I used to boast about, all of the fasting I was doing or boast about all of these choices I was making. And even
mm,
just that little thing of like, hey, this is what our family's doing, but we will high five somebody that's eating a bacon cheeseburger because we know how good it is. But like, we're not. doing it because we're wanting to take care of the land in a certain way. And this is the way that we feel like our faithfulness and our worship is playing out right now. But it's so
Mhm.
interesting how naturally things come. Whereas before it was always sort of like white knuckling it because of principles. And I've watched that with you, like the way that you, obviously I get to, more insight into your life because we're family, but watching the ways that you make decisions and hearing your stories before you unleaven, before you remove this toxicity, and hearing how you move now and the way that you raise your family, the way that you live out your faith. It is really interesting to see that, like, extracting whiteness has similar effects for most people, actually.
Mhm.
It's the same kind of theme. There is an extra layer of care and being like circumspect about the way that you live and move, the way you treat people, the way you treat the ground, the way that you raise kids. And I definitely want to have you back about that, because I know that you have a whole lot on that and that I love talking to you about it. Um, but I think what I want the readers to kind of, not the readers, the people listening, to really walk away from is that, unleavening is a process that we all go through, and it is a process.
Mhm.
I'm wondering from you, what is the difference, what is the most stark difference that you see in how you did your faith before and what it looks like now? What's the biggest difference, if you could name the biggest thing?
So before, I mean, you and I have talked about the reason that we're all still here is that while I was in church worshiping white Jesus, I had real experience with um, came as brown Jesus,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I'd had that experience, and that's what carried me and held me.
Mhm.
But what I was asked to do was such a disembodied experience,
Mm. Mhm.
right? Specifically as a woman in the church, and you go into your beautiful book even more as a black woman in the church. So I can only speak, as a white woman in the church. I was still being asked, whether it was purity culture, whether whatever it was, to really have this disembodied experience
Mhm. Mhm.
of my faith. I was just supposed to do it what I was told.
Mhm.
And there is, as you start shedding off, decolonizing, some people like to say deconstructing, I like decolonizing a little bit better, but decolonizing our faith. And as you see that our creator is brilliant and
Mhm.
wise and made you, right? And you
Mhm.
start realizing, wow, this skin I'm living in, this story that I'm born with,
Mhm.
whoever my ancestors were, this was this was an intentional thing by creator.
Mhm.
So coming more and more home to myself,
Mhm.
um, through the grace that is therapy, right? And some of the
Amen.
other stepping
Therapy.
stepping away from my Jesus, coming more and more into my body,
Mhm.
into listening to what my body's saying. I
Mhm.
think the spirit uses our body so often to
Mhm.
speak to us. In fact, my daughters were asking me, like, what is it to listen to spirit? And I said, I think that she often speaks through our bodies. Like, I
Mhm.
think often we're feeling her through that gut instinct that we get,
Mhm.
that beautiful gut instinct. So it's for me a lot more coming home to myself
Mhm.
in all the ways that it looks like, right? And the ancestry and the land is a piece of that, but
Mhm.
an embodiment of what it looks like to be me and
Mhm.
following the beautiful thing that is Jesus, and
Mhm.
having the freedom to love other people too, right? Isn't that a piece of it? Like you were
Yeah.
you were told who you were allowed to love and not love. They called it love, right? But it wasn't really love.
Ah, that
And
part.
now I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I get to love everybody. This is so much more fun than
It's a lot more fun.
choosing.
Yeah, for sure. Now you're making me want to tell this story, so I didn't prepare you for this. But
Oh, yeah, go for it.
so you officiated my wedding,
Yes, I
yeah,
did.
in Italy. And I just want people to know kind of like when the last time you did a wedding was, what the reason you stopped doing weddings, and then the next wedding you did. So this whole story around you stopped taking
Oh,
film, you
I've never
stopped,
stopped taking photos.
yes.
I have to
Why
jog
did
my
you,
memory.
yeah, so
Jog
you
my
said you
memory.
stopped taking wedding photos because you didn't want to shoot a gay wedding, remember?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I forgot I told you that. Yes, no, this was a whole piece. Is I was worried a gay couple was going to ask me. I had other reasons too, but I was worried a gay couple was going to ask me to photograph their wedding, and I was going to have to say no,
So you
right? And I
quit.
just that was part of the reason I quit wedding photography. Now the next time I'm like actively involved in a wedding, I'm freaking officiating it.
Yeah,
So
I'm
I
doing
would have
quite.
been kicked out of every church I've been part of up until the age
Yeah.
of like
I just think
35.
that's so funny. Like, I mean, to me, that's a beautiful picture that, like, and I'm actually feeling it right now because I think what's beautiful to me about that is that I get that. And I think every person who grew up evangelical had the question of, like, what would I do if I got invited to a gay wedding? And we already had the answers in our mind. Like, we knew, we were kind of like, we're going to stand firm and we're not going to da da da. And it's so funny to see how, you had that stance because you loved God and you were trying to be
Mhm.
faithful and you were trying to be a person who was walking out your faithfulness, and you thought that this is what Jesus
Yeah.
required of you.
Yeah.
All of that to fast forward, and just, I'm not going to give that away because that's precious and that was a moment for us. But what you said, the things that you felt that Holy Spirit gave you to say over
Mhm.
us, as we said our vows, and just thinking that that too was faithfulness, and that,
Yeah.
I guess my hope for this podcast is that people would not feel, and I know that you, and again, we talk a lot, we talk about my beef a little bit with deconstruction is because there's no movement involved. I mean, when you take
Yeah.
something apart, it doesn't imply that there's any sort of movement. But decolonizing or unleavening, these are progressive terms. They're terms that
Mhm.
acknowledge that we have not arrived, that we will have to do a constant process of checking these things,
Yeah.
and it gives us this freedom to kind of go, okay, I thought that at one point, because I loved God and this is what it looked like, or what I thought it looked like. And I
Yeah.
think this now because I love God and this is what I feel like it looks like. And,
Yeah.
and I hope that in 10 years, we're having conversations about where we were now, right? And how we've
Yeah.
changed. And I think that it's beautiful that our faith and our faith tradition is inherently progressive, and that the only place it's going is in the direction of more love and like inclusion,
Yes.
peace, justice. And so
Yeah.
I'm really thankful for that, and I'm thankful that story to me speaks, really kind of encapsulates what I'm hoping to do with this podcast, is to say, like, what you had and what you did was not in vain.
Yeah.
That was real, and that just because you were able to meet Jesus in the context of worshiping white Jesus doesn't mean you have to throw the whole thing out, because Jesus is so eager to meet people that he'll bend around any corner. He'll come
That
into
is
any
true.
space. He'll come to Kentucky if he has to, right? Like, he'll show up in a he gets us commercial. And these are things I want to be aware of. Um,
Mhm.
as I do my work and as I'm out here doing what I'm doing, because it's like, people have real histories. And we would do a disservice to folks to say all of it was trash. And we're going to find the
Yes.
treasure in that trash. And we're
Yes.
going to take it with us. So that actually perfectly segues to the last questions. We ask everybody 3 questions. We're asking, what are you bringing? What are you binging? And where we can find you, or is there anything you want to plug? And so the first question I'm asking you is, what are you bringing with you from the rubble of this fragmented faith experience?
I'm bringing Jesus for
Hey,
sure,
come on.
because my one of my dear friends likes to say, a modern day miracle is that I still love Jesus after what I watched here.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm sure you can agree with that as well. But like I said earlier, while I was asked on Sundays to worship and follow white Jesus, the authentic, loving, subversive brown Jesus
Mm-hmm.
was the one I met quietly,
Mm-hmm.
um, during the days, because we would have our devotions, right?
Yes, of course.
But I loved from a young age. I loved Jesus. I will
Mm-hmm.
still pray over my children.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, what you and I have, will you give them?
Yes.
Because um, I could just go on and on. But yeah, so Jesus is the authentic,
Mm-hmm.
God wrapped up in
Mm-hmm.
human skin. Jesus is what's been, come along with me. I wouldn't say that I brought him. I would say he brought me. I literally look back and kind of think of him sort of tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "That's enough, honey. We're getting out of here."
Yep.
And little did I know, it was going to be the most beautiful part of my journey so far.
That's good. Ashe. Okay, so are you binging anything? Any movies, film, I know we love documentaries,
I do love
albums,
music.
anything like that? Anything you binging that you want to tell us about?
Oh gosh. I've been binging some cult documentaries for sure, but I was actually thinking what I've been binging, not that this is unusual. I've been binging 90s hip hop.
Hey,
I,
yes.
I love
I
me
was
some
hoping you
90s
were gonna
hip
say
hop.
it.
So yes, I think I go with 90s hip hop. I don't know that like working moms can exactly be like, I've been binging this show, because we're the ones that have watched 2 shows and are like, is this binging? This might be binging. Everyone's else like, no, you lightweight. We're talking about sitting down and watching a whole season. No, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, that doesn't.
But 90s hip hop can go along into my mom life. So that's what
No, I knew I should marry Ellison when you told me you love Biggie. I'm just kidding. That was part of the reason, though. I mean, you know what I mean. I married a white, so I had to make
okay.
sure
But
somebody
can I
wasn't
share
talking
a funny story from your wedding real quick?
for it.
So my sister Christine and I were laughing so hard because you were in charge of the music, right? And so you're like, I just married in a white family, so you were trying to accommodate
I
us.
sure
You got
was.
thrown in some pop songs, and every time one would come on, the dance floor would clear off, and everyone felt uncomfortable until you finally are like, you guys don't like this stuff, and we're like, no, this is gross.
Mama, I made it.
And you're like, oh my gosh, good. I was making this playlist just for you guys. And I think from there on, it was like just
Yeah,
the good
we
stuff.
good for life. We good. Man, I'm so happy to have you. Last thing we're going to ask you is, are there any words to live by, or thoughts, or any final words you want to leave with our guests? And then we'll ask where they can find you.
Yeah. So my final thought, just all that we just talked about with ancestors, land,
Yeah.
culture, is that I think about the Bible saying, you've got to take off the old and put on the new.
Hmm.
And I would say you can't just add this to white evangelicalism. You can't just add it. Otherwise, you're going to end up co-opting things and just harming and hurting people more. There's a whole process for taking off the whiteness and the white Jesus in the system, especially if
Hmm.
you are a light-skinned person like me, especially that there has to be an undoing first. And that was the first part of the journey, was the
Hmm.
undoing. And it was very uncomfortable, and it's not short, and it's never going to be fully done. I think of whiteness as a cancer.
Hmm.
And if your cancer goes into remission, you're still going to be getting regular checkups, working on it. And there's so much danger to being like, that's it, great, I'm done. I've
Hmm.
separated myself from whiteness. I'm still picking apart, over a decade later, picking
Hmm.
out and still going to the doctor for checkups. I'm thinking of some of my friends that check me and will speak into my life. So I think there's a whole process for repentance and pulling
Yes.
off that old.
Hmm.
And the new is this beautiful replacement after we have rejected the
Mm.
systems, and after we have said, no more, I will not take part in this willingly anymore. And God, show me where I'm still continuing to take part.
So good. So good. That's partly why, I like the unleavened bread piece, because they have
Mm,
to eat it every year at least,
yeah.
to remind them to stay unleavened. So thank you for that. Where can folks find you and your beautiful photography? And how can they go on trips? I'm plugging them for you.
Oh, you're sweet. You can find me probably the place that I'm the most active is Instagram. So at Alyssa Sieb on Instagram, and there I am. You'll see my photography there, but it's more and more getting towards. I've been trying to do responsible small group travel
Mhm.
since I have a lot of travel under my belt, and I think there's something really powerful about how we move um, and in travel and in other cultures, whether it's that white attitude of taking and plundering in our travel, or whether it's humility, caring about where our money goes, caring about how we interact with cultures and what we can learn. So I'm more and more trying to not only do the trips, but even
Yeah.
gear the content more to what does it look like to kind of go against the grain, go against the perfect, Instagram model and the, fluffy dress running through some. I always think of the locals in that, and especially since I live in a place where there's tourists, like, oh gosh, sometimes we just roll our eyes like, oh my God, the tourists. But yeah, so I'm trying to take some of the stuff that I've learned and loved about responsible travel and put it just out into content. So whether it's a trip with me or whether you just want to learn a little bit more about cultures and responsible travel, you can find me at Alyssa Sieb. But can I plug something?
Sure, you can plug something.
Oh, my sister-in-law's amazing book that just came out. If you are listening to this podcast and you have not read this woman's book, go buy it right now. And then make sure that when you start it, you have a set aside time because you're not going to want to put it down. I'm so proud of what Tamice has done. She has just put together this amazing book. So I'm plugging your book here. Love that.
Appreciate you, and thank you everybody for listening. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining us.